Hello, today I'm going to show you how to make a beautiful rustic table for less than $100. To start out, what you're going to need is 3 2x12s, 12 foot long, 2 4x4s that are 8 foot long, and 2 2x4s that are 8 foot long. So the first thing you'll do is you'll cut the 2x12s into two 38-inch pieces. Then you'll take two of them and you'll cut them into 60-inch pieces. These will be the one side of the table, and then you'll come through and you'll cut two 43-inch pieces. We're cutting them straight first so we can cut the insides so they're easier to join, and I use a table saw to trim a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch off of the two inside pieces. These are the 38-inch boards, and then you'll cut a 1/4 inch off of the inside of all the other ones. Next, I'm cutting a bevel on the 60-inch pieces. This is to have a picture frame sort of join, just to create a little bit different design on the table. So I'm doing this with the 60-inch boards first. Make sure they have a good 45-degree angle. And I'll lay those out, not doing anything to the 38-inch pieces. Next, what I'm doing is I'm taking a Kregg jig and I'm cutting pocket holes. Doing this to join the boards. You don't need to do this, but it's helpful because you don't have to wait for the wood glue to dry while you're putting the rest of the table together. So here I'm gluing and putting the pocket screws on. It's really important that the joints are even whenever you're putting the table together. You'll thank yourself later when you go to sand. Here I'm using pipe clamps. These aren't necessary, but it does help the table to dry more evenly, and then it'll help me to fit the other boards in there. Now that I've got the part of the table together, I'm actually cutting the 45-degree angles out for the 43-inch pieces. I can make specific cuts and make them fit perfectly for this. Here I am cutting more pocket holes to join the 43-inch boards. Once again, it's really important that the boards fit perfectly. You want to take your time and make sure they're even. You'll thank yourself later when you go to sand the boards. I'm doing this to both sides, just spending a little extra time doing that. Here I am cutting the legs for the table. I'm cutting 4 28.5-inch boards. These are the 4x4s. After I do that, I'm cutting bevels, 1/4 inch bevels that are 45-degree angles on the ends of the legs. Doing that to give it a little bit different design on the bottom. A really simple way to make the table stand out. Really simple. Cut those little bevels, and then what you'll want to do is you'll want to sand these pieces before you put them on the table. Here I'm marking the center of each 4x4. That's the top of the 4x4s, and I'm pre-drilling holes. We're going to use lag screws, double-headed lag screws. You can get these at Lowe's to join them to the table. I'm marking the center where I want the lag screws to go in to where I'm going to join the legs. I put them about 1.5 inches in from the 2-inch marker. That way my legs are about 2 inches away. I just installed the lag screws and you just screw them right on. They fit perfectly. I came back and added a little bit of wood glue that should help hold it a little more tightly. Now you take the 2x4s and you trim them to match perfectly to fit in between the legs. You can make individual measurements for those. And then what I'll do is I'll use pocket holes to join those not only to the table but also to the legs. That's really important. It'll help sturdy it up. Taking off the clamps, began sanding. I put some wood filler, and some of the tighter spots are a little bit tough to get perfect, so you'll want to invest in a little bit of wood glue or wood filler, to get those little cracks and stuff. It also any knots that you might have, you can fill those in. And once again, this is where you'll thank yourself if you spent a little more time and joined those boards up more evenly. As you can see, I had a little bit of a lip there on the left side, and took a little bit longer to sand, but if you take your time and join those, you'll thank yourself. So, important thing to note, I'm using 80 grit sandpaper here to get all the stuff down to like a fine finish, and then you can come back with 220 and make it a little bit more even. Here we're using dark walnut to stain the table. A good thing to note is that you can use a cloth instead of a brush. A cloth actually spreads easier. I'd be surprised, but it does a better job, I think, in filling the wood with stain. And I used stain all over the whole table. We are going to paint the legs white, but you can see later on why we stained the whole table. If you whitewash, you'll be able to see the stain through that. So it's important to stain the whole table. It really doesn't take that much longer to do that. Alright, so taking your time staining, you can go with the grain. It's not really that important. I just put a really light coat on. And then after it dries, I use polyurethane. There's a few different things you can use, varnish. I use polyurethane. I like the way it finishes it. But it's important to go with the grains with a brush, with a clean brush. And we will sand this down with a 220 later and do one more coat. I just do 2 coats. I think it looks good and it holds up pretty well. Next, I've flipped it over and we've whitewashed the legs and the frame. To do this, you just take a normal paintbrush with a little white paint and thinly apply it. You can apply it in a couple layers. Just make sure you don't overcoat it unless you're just going for that new look. Just thinly applying it will give it that whitewashed look. Then we take some 220 sandpaper and start sanding. Just make sure you sand with the grains. That'll help give a lot better finish, and it kind of hides the sand marks when you sand with the grains. Take a brush, wipe it off, take a rag, wet rag, wipe it off, and then come back and put another coat of varnish or polyurethane on, in my case. Just a little bit of time. And these materials are very, very cheap. As you can see, I've got a gallon jugs, but if you use a smaller, you can probably use pint size for all these if you just make the table. And that'll keep you under $100 if you do that. And once again, make sure you go with the grain when you're applying polyurethane or varnish to make sure you hide those brush strokes when you're putting this on the table. It's really important. If you like this video, please subscribe to my page. We'll get some other videos on here. Next up, we're going to try to make the chairs that go along with this table. So check it out, and we'll make them for less than $100 also.